Hey, this is Warren Redlick with a Lucid Motors update ahead of their earnings call and earnings results for Q1 of 2022. Lucid to report first quarter results on Thursday. Today is Monday, so just a few days ahead, we're going to hear these results. Are you ready? Let's go! There's been some Lucid news in the past few weeks, probably to juice people up for the earnings call. You can see Lucid announced a deal for the purchase of up to 100,000 electric vehicles. This looks a little bit like a sham story. Up to 100,000 vehicles, meaning it's really 70,000 or less. From the way I read it, the maximum I think the order would be 7,000 vehicles a year for a 10-year period, and the first few years are lower. So I think this is really like 50, 60,000 cars at most. From the Saudi government, of course, the Saudi government is buying Lucid cars to prop up their investment in a company that's going to go bankrupt. The Lucid Q t-shirt's available at elonbits.com if you're interested. Another piece of news, I don't think this was really a surprise, is that Lucid CEO Peter Rawlinson received over $260 million in, quote, performance-based awards. They didn't perform. They didn't deliver cars in any significant volume. The performance wasn't based on actually achieving any real goals that would be appropriate for a company. He pumped the stock price. The stock price went up, and he got performance-based awards based on the performance of the stock. Not based on delivering cars, not on producing cars in volume, not on getting people to order cars, just getting the stock price pumped. And he received $250 million. Apparently no one sees a problem with this. I think there's something questionable about this. Other news, this could be substantive here. First of all, they delivered Grand Tourings. Every once in a while, Lucid will tweet about how they delivered cars. And these are Grand Touring versions. I think that means they're through delivering the Dream Edition. We should get some numbers on how many deliveries they made through the end of March. Now, we're already into May. My impression is that we're going to see a small number of deliveries. They sort of hinted at that at the last earnings call, that the first two quarters, not just the previous quarter, but the quarter we're in now, would have a small number of deliveries, and they're supposedly going to make it up in the third and fourth quarter. We'll see if they actually deliver. Another piece of news that they just sort of ginned up is that Lucid has announced that they're coming up with a new vehicle, a new version of the Grand Touring, a performance model that they'll sell for $179,000. That over 1,000 horsepower with 446 miles of range. This looks a lot like it's the Dream Edition without calling it the Dream Edition. This is the Dream Edition performance version, and they're just not calling it that. And they decided, well, we need to do something to get some news. No one's going to buy this $179,000 car. But let's see if we can scare up some news and get some attention to us. And the dual motor high performance version makes the 0 to 60 in 2.6 seconds, which is odd because the Dream Edition performance is maybe doing 2.8, depending on who tests it. What is the story here? How many of these are you going to sell? What's the plan? How does this fit with the previous plans you made? It doesn't. They've got problems. But here's the description. They're just describing what they've got. Over 1,000 horsepower, under 3 seconds, 0 to 60, nearly 450 miles of range. This is the Dream Edition performance version. They just changed the name, and they charged an extra $10,000 for it. And no one's going to order this, but okay. Rawlinson was quoted as saying, "The remarkable speed with which we are able to conceive and bring this model to market is possible only because of vertical integration." It's the same car you were already selling. This is not different from the Dream. You're taking off the Dream Edition badging. This is nothing special, and this isn't what you said you were going to do. You said you were going to sell the lower versions of the Lucid Air. When is the Pure coming out? When are you going to start selling other vehicles? When are you going to show the Lucid Project Gravity SUV? This has nothing to do with anything you talked about before. This is just a fluff story, an easy vehicle to make since you're already making something similar to it. Of course, not easy for you to make anything because you can't make anything. But this is an easy thing to, quote, redesign when you just take the Dream Edition badging off and pop Grand Touring badging on and maybe tweak the software a little bit. This is just a little thing to splash some news, to get some horrible attempt at some sort of positive news spin before you head into the earnings call when we're going to have probably a pretty disastrous earnings call, right? Next up in this update, Lucid invited investors to submit questions. So here's the top 9 questions that I have. How do you intend to compete with both Tesla and Rivian given current supply chain and market constraints? This is silly because they don't compete with Rivian at all. Rivian sells pickups and SUVs. Lucid is selling a luxury sedan. Arguably, the Lucid Air competes with the Tesla Model S, but it's much, much, much more expensive and doesn't have the supercharger network and doesn't have the same quality software. They're not really competing with them anyway. They're really trying to compete with the Mercedes EQS and the Mercedes S-Class. That's always been their real target. And they're not competing because their challenge isn't competing with other products. The challenge is making cars in any volume, and they're not there. Next question. The investor presentation in July 2021 mentions a prototype energy storage system progressing well. How is the Lucid energy storage system progressing now? When do you expect production for this to begin? Never. Not going to happen. They're not doing it. It was fluff. They have no plans to do this. They made it up. They supposedly have a prototype working at the main office. That's all they got. There's no plans to they can't make anything in volume. Why would they go to this? They got no prayers. And if they're going to do something, they're going to do Project Gravity, the SUV, which is more likely to sell than the crappy sedan they've got now, which, you know, the higher end SUV might have a better shot of selling. They really need to make cars in volume, and they're not close to that. Jameson P asks, with the report of Saudi Arabia buying upwards of 100,000 cars, no, it was up to 100,000 cars, not upwards of. This must be a planted question. Do you think that will drive more buyers from other areas of the world, or are there other big orders such as that just aren't public? This is like a fluff question that was submitted by somebody friendly to Lucid who's trying to give a good spin to the news. It was up to 100,000 cars, and when you read the numbers, it's not more than 70,000 cars. It's really more like 50 or 60,000 cars. How is this going to drive more buyers from other areas of the world? They don't have any service or support ready for anywhere else in the world except maybe England. But they'll give some fluff answer to this question. This question is obviously planted. I'm guessing Peter Rawlinson voted for it and voted it up. This is just a silly question. Mo D asks, what's Lucid's 5-year plan? Their 5-year plan was stated in the SPAC deck, the slide deck that went along with a SPAC merger, and they're very far off their 5-year plan. So I guess the question is, have you revised your 5-year plan to acknowledge you're nowhere close to the goals you stated at the beginning? Where do you really think you'll be in 5 years? And I would expect they're not going to give a significant answer to this question, but we'll see. Maybe they do. Another question about the ESS. When do you expect production to begin and what selling price? I'm going to guess we're going to get no answer to this question at all. Be interesting to see if we get a material answer to this question. Do you plan to make affordable vehicles? Their 5-year plan said that in 2025 or 2026, they would start making a more affordable vehicle. That's probably pushed out to 2027 or 2028 now. If the company still exists by then, which it won't because Lucid's going to go bankrupt. T-shirts at elonbits.com. The last page of questions, how does Lucid plan on competing with Tesla's price points that speak to almost all buys from entry to luxury? I think this is kind of the wrong question. Lucid is not trying to compete with Tesla on price. They're trying to compete by delivering vehicles that are higher end than anything that Tesla sells. So arguably the Lucid Air sedan is higher end in terms of luxury and that sort of experience than the Model S. And the Model S is not really something Tesla is pushing hard on anyway. So they're really trying to compete with Mercedes S-Class and maybe the Mercedes EQS and maybe the BMW 7 Series. That's really what they're aiming for, higher end vehicles. They're not really aiming for Tesla. What is Lucid's plans for a charging network? Tesla has the advantage over the EV market right now. Will Lucid be mirroring a similar solution? Lucid has no plans to develop their own charging network. They're working with other charging companies. I think, forget which ones they're working with. They're working with other charging companies, and it's not a great experience, and there just isn't enough of them, and they don't work well, and it's a huge problem. And what any EV company should be doing is talking to Tesla about sharing the supercharger network, but that would be promoting Tesla's brand, so they can't do that. Are you planning on releasing a new vehicle this year? If so, when do you think it will come out? They're working on Project Gravity, supposedly, but it wouldn't come out until 2023 at the earliest, and much more likely the Project Gravity won't come out till 2024. They supposedly are working on a lower-end vehicle for the future, but that's way off down the road. Those are the questions. What I expect going forward, the really big thing we need to look for in Lucid's report is how much are they spending and how much cash do they have left? And they're sort of in a difficult situation here because they told us in the Q4 that they couldn't manufacture in volume yet because of supply chain constraints. And they didn't expect to really produce in volume until Q3, which is not even now. That's starting in July, and probably what that really means is September because they push everything off to the last minute, and it really means Q4. And they had projected delivering 10 to 12,000 vehicles this year. They're going to deliver 1,000, 2,000 vehicles this year. But what we'll see in the earnings report, first of all, we'll see how many vehicles to deliver in Q1. That's going to be news, and it should not be a lot. It's going to be low hundreds. Maybe 200-300. Maybe if they make 500 vehicles, I'd be surprised for the quarter. That will point to a certain level of revenue. And then the question is, how much are they spending? Because they're supposedly expanding their factory space. They may be spending money in Saudi Arabia. They're spending money opening more stores. They're paying staff as they grow their number of service centers and stores. They got to pay more people. How much money are they spending? And if they're not spending much, that means they're not investing for the future. You're either investing for the future or you aren't. One of the things about Rivian, you can quibble with Rivian's approach. Rivian has a big cash pile and they're spending it to get ready to produce in high volumes. Lucid has a small cash pile, and if they start spending it, they get closer to Lucid Q, to bankruptcy. They're caught in a dilemma. Given the supply chain, it does make sense to not spend money now, to wait until it looks like the supply chain problems are going to resolve, to keep your spending under your control so you can keep the cash situation viable so you can afford to expend money when the time comes that the supply chain is resolved, if it's resolved. I'm not seeing a lot of progress on the supply chain being resolved anytime soon. They've got commitments to sell vehicles at certain prices, and inflation is making their costs go up. Supply chain is making their costs go up. They're really in a pickle. And it'll be interesting to see what's their revenue number, what's their delivery number, and what are they spending. And contrast that with Rivian. Rivian is spending a lot of money. Rivian says, we got this big cash pile. Let's get ready for when the market's ready for us. And Lucid is in this really tight spot where if they spend their money, they might run out before they're ready. And if they run out, then they're going to have to go to Papa Saudi, the king of Saudi Arabia, Prince of Saudi, or whoever, to get more money to fund this pig. And once they do that, shareholders are going to be diluted. They got a problem. Are they going to borrow money and then they increase their expenses because interest rates are up? Are they going to get an interest-free loan from the Saudis? How do the Saudis bail this pig out? I have no idea. There will be a lot of fluff. I don't expect to hear a lot of substance in the call. They're going to, avoid, like, one of the questions would be, one of the questions should be, how many vehicles did you sell in April? Right? We're going to hear how many they sold from January to March. Well, how many did you sell in April? Right? We're on May 5th. You know how many vehicles you sold in April. This is a challenge right now to Lucid Motors. Tell us how many vehicles you sold in April. How many vehicles you delivered to customers in April? Because right now what I saw is you bragged about delivering 4 vehicles over the span of about 2 weeks. That's not promising. I don't think they're going to say how many vehicles they delivered in April. And this is a challenge to Lucid Motors. It's a real substantive number. Tell us how many vehicles you delivered in April. I don't think they can do it. I don't think they will do it. So that's the update on Lucid Motors. I'm going to be probably live streaming Thursday after the earnings call to go over what we learned and talk about the details. And then we'll see what you think. We'll see if they give us anything new. We'll see if they give us anything of substance. We'll see if there's any hope for this pig of a company. I'm predicting Lucid ultimately goes bankrupt, fails, massively disappoints investors, massively disappoints customers. Right now, I think they're spending $2 million a vehicle in order to sell them for less than $200,000. And that's not a good business model going forward. You have to be able to manufacture at scale, and they're nowhere close to that. When are they going to get there? We have no idea. That's the kind of question that should be asked. How close are you to manufacturing at scale? How close are you to getting your manufacturing costs down? And I don't think we're going to hear anything about that. We're going to hear fluff, fluff, and more fluff. The soft, dulcet tones of Peter Rawlinson's British accent, and not much else. If you like this video, please check out my other videos. Please support this channel on the Locals platform or on Patreon or as a YouTube channel member. Links to all of that in the description below. Check out the t-shirts at elonbits.com. And thank you so much for watching.